So today we're talking about how to privatize your public resources, particularly when they are PaaS resources. We know that typically, if you want to create, if you want to run applications inside of your network, you set up a virtual network. You have virtual machines inside of those virtual networks, and you have websites inside of those virtual machines that basically handle that. The problem with that is that you basically lose all the power and flexibility of platforms as a service applications, which you can dramatically scale up and scale down, change resources as needed. Once you move to the virtual machine model, you're moving to a model of capacity planning well ahead, and in a lot of ways wasting money on resources that you may or may not need. In the elastic model with app services using PaaS, basically there's service elasticity, so you can set it up where it scales up as your usage scales up, scales down as your usage scales down. So you maximize value while minimizing cost. That's the big value proposition of IaaS. So what to do in a scenario where you want to build an intranet application, you want it accessible only to people inside of your network, and big but you want to use app services. Now, one of the ways that that's been done in the past is using a technology called app service environments, which give you the ability to run your external app services inside of your network, and additionally give you the ability to have a static IP address associated with your app service for scenarios where that's needed. A new technology available in Azure in preview right now is a technology called private endpoints, which basically offer you that same capability. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a scenario, and I'm going to show you how to create a private endpoint, and we'll talk a little bit about what it does and how it works. So to get started setting up your private endpoint, what you're going to need is you're going to need a virtual network that runs inside of that private endpoint. So we're going to create one right now. So let's go ahead and type a VNet and type. So we're just creating right now a virtual network that's going to run that we're going to put that private endpoint in. So what we're really doing is we're simulating how what's going to look like in an enterprise. And typically an enterprise will have an internal network, right? Like when you go to work, you're on a specific network separate from when you're connecting to google.com, right? So as part of setting up a virtual network, you basically need to define the address space for that network. Over here on the left side, you see the IP address, and on the right side, you have the prefix. So this mode is called CIDR. It's a way of, it's a notation, a way of defining the range of IP addresses that's inside of that particular slot that you want to contain. It's by groups of 816, basically base 2. And an easy way for you to identify how many IP addresses are in there is basically by subtracting whatever number is here from 32 and making that the exponent in a base 2 calculation, right? So for example, if I were to put 28 here, right, that would mean that there are 2 to the 4 IP addresses, which is around 16 IP addresses. So if I were to open up a range here and I basically enter the same thing here, it's a great way to check it. You'll see that it's storing 11 plus 5, so 16 IP addresses altogether, right? So again, it's a very simple way of looking at it. The other thing to note is that so for example, let's make this 24. So now that you make this 24, each time you add a subnet, right? So we'll now add this subnet and just call it default, right? Which is 28. Okay. Let's say we wanted to add another subnet, and we wanted that subnet to be 26, right? So 26 is now 2 to the 6, which is around, I think, 64, right? But in order to add 64, you have to match it to a block that's even to that, right? You can't just have a range of 64 starting right after this. So if I now went, um, you know, over here, and of course, I go 16, which is the beginning of the address space, right? And so I already have 28, and so if I put 16, then I could also put 28 here, right? So if I put 16, I can put 28 here because it's getting into that block of 32. I have one 16 block here, and I have another 16 block here, right? But if I change it to 26, right, it's not going to work because that block doesn't fit, right? There's 60, 64, there's a 64 block that you need to be in. So in order to do that, I would need to move this to 64, right? So I'm saying the first 64 are locked in, and I'm taking over I want this block is the next 64, right? So just be mindful of that as you're setting up your IP addresses here. We don't necessarily need another subnet for this. The other thing to note is that for VNets are broken into subnets. You don't actually place anything into a VNet. You actually place it in a subnet, and each one of the subnets can be secured with what's called a network security group, which we won't really get into right now. But basically, each one of them can be secured as needed. You can apply firewalls across the board to the whole VNet, and on and on and on, right? So for the purposes of this, we're basically done. We're just creating a very simple VNet. Okay. And while that's loading, the other thing that we're gonna go ahead and do, oh, it's already done. Wow, that was fast. So the other thing we're also gonna do, go back here to my resource groups, demo labs. Okay, just gonna pin that to the dashboard. Okay. The other thing we're going to do is we're also going to create a VM. Now, why do we need a VM? Well, we need a VM because once we put something into that VNet, it's not going to be accessible from the outside world, right? Which is what we want. So we need a way to sort of like prove out that, that this is actually, that this whole thing is working, right? So we basically create a simple VM. Just the Microsoft Windows 10. It's so hard to find these. I'm gonna just save it so it's easier to find. So we're creating a VM for Windows 10 server. So this is basically going to, I would say, emulate a person's machine that's in your network, right? So labs VM. I'm gonna put it in the same resource group. There's no particular reason for this at this point, but just kind of doing it. Size, I don't want to break the bank here. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Password. So I'm gonna call this Monica. Okay. 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 So that's fine. We want RDP to be allowed here. That just means remote desktop. Um, next, disk, that's fine. Premium. Networking, we're putting it into the Demo Labs VM. We're specifying a public IP for it, which is the IP that we can, the IP address that we can use to access it publicly, even though it will also have a private IP. Um, we're not putting any kind of security on the NIC card, which is basically the networking card associated with the machine. And this is because we would have that security specified at the subnet level. So you can't even get to the machine if you don't have the, if you're coming from the wrong place. We don't need a load balancing. We don't need any management for now. And we are done. Oh, we missed something. What did we miss? Oh, yeah. Okay. So that's going to create the VM, which ordinarily takes a while. Everything's been humming today, so I mean, running great. So I don't know, but we'll wait to see. Once that pops up, we know that, then we know that's done. And while that's happening, we're now going to go in and go to that next step, which is to create the private endpoint. Okay, so let's go ahead and go in here. I'm going to say private endpoint, private link. It actually creates an endpoint. Okay, so over here we want to create the private endpoint. So we're going to add that here. Okay, we're also putting it in demo labs. Okay, and we're also going to put it in the same region. And then over here is where you specify the resource that you want to connect to. Now, what's going to happen in this scenario, you'll see for a second, is that for right now, because this is in preview, and I don't know, maybe for monetary purposes or reasons or what have you, Microsoft has locked down the the kind of app service that you can connect to. So you can't just use any app service, any tier of app service as an app service that allows for private endpoints. Right now, it has to be a premium app service, which is about 150 bucks a month for you to do this. But again, if you're doing something like this, you are typically in a larger organization, or you're just rich, and so you don't, so the price point doesn't matter to you. So as you will see, we have not configured this. We configured this particular website that we created that we're planning to use as free. So I will not be able to create a private link to that website. So let's see how that works. If you want to create a private link, you go down here, you select Microsoft Websites. Okay, then you select the website that you want to use. In this case, I want to use Demo Labs Public. And as you can see, resource is not supported. Okay, so for us to do this, we would have to go back here, cancel out of here, go back to this guy right here, and using the power and beauty of app services, basically scale up the service plan. So meaning like just increase the level, the level of the service plan, right? So right now we're on free, we don't spend any money. We're gonna have to go into production, and we're going to have to go to a premium level, which I believe this is. I wonder if these work right here. I know that works, but Just wondering if that, oh no, it's standard. Okay, yeah. So P1, V2. So that P stands for premium here, not production actually. I'm going to apply that. So now that's updating. It's updated. Um, and that is basically it. So we can go back here. Now, when I do the same thing, private link, create, create, put it in the east, select the resource type, and now select that. As you can see, it now says it is. Well, it doesn't say anything, but it's because it's actually supported. Move over to configuration. And now what's happening here is that we are specifying well, it's going to do a couple of things. Let's go through it, right? So the first thing we're doing is we're saying, hey, what VNet is this private link going to be in? Because again, remember what's happening is that we are taking the app service, which is ordinarily public, and we are giving it an internal private IP address so it can be accessed internally through that IP address. Looks like our VMs are set up, okay, so that it can be accessed through that IP address, right? Next, because again, this is an app service, right? So an app service, could just be a website inside of an IIS machine, inside of your web server, right? You actually need a host name to identify. It does not necessarily need to be running on an entire VM, right? So because of this, you need a name to associate with it. So now you go to the next level, and what's happening on the next level is that we need to specify a DNS name, a name for that app service, right? So previously, the app service was called demolabs-public.azurewebsites.net. Now you will be able to resolve it with demolabs/public.azurewebsites.net .privatelink.azurewebsites.net. And when you use that URL, it will resolve to a 10 dot address inside of the subnets. So let's go ahead and let's say next. The validations have passed, and we will now create the private link. So while that is going on, let's go back here. Go back to our demo labs. And now our demo labs VM is done. It's cooked. So we should be able to go into our demo labs VM, and we should be able to connect to it. So I'm going to just connect to that via RDP. Okay. So I'm going to download this RDP file. And I have a special folder that I put all these in. And once that's downloaded, I can connect to it. Okay, it's asking for my certificate. And that's it. We're connecting to the VM that we just created on the cloud. And it's a full-on Windows machine running there. So this is going to take a while because it's going to have to, it's basically like you just, bought a new computer. You have to go through all the Cortana setup, and well, not Cortana, but you have to go through a little bit of setup on the machine, and you'll see. Let's see if this is done. No, that's still going as well. So a number of things going, there we go. So I'm just gonna accept this. And there we go. So we are now inside of this VNet on the cloud. So let's do a couple of things here. Just gonna open up PowerShell. Okay, so as you can see here, you open up PowerShell, you get the IP address 10.0.0.4. So that is the IP address of this machine. I'm gonna go ahead and you can go ahead and just get the new version of Edge while we're waiting here. Oh, looks like that's done. Okay, so let's go back here. I'm just gonna refresh this just so we can see everything that's here. All right, over here, make sure. Okay, so that's downloading, perfect. Okay, so what do we have now? So going through quickly, we have our private endpoint, right? The Demo Labs private endpoint, which you can see here. And as you can see, the Demo Labs private endpoint has this IP address, demolabspublic.azurewebsites.net as 10.0.0.5. So this has been configured, this website that we see here, right? Let's refresh that. Look at that. See what happened there? So now, because we have a private endpoint, endpoint associated with it, you can no longer access this publicly, right? Because this is actually resolving to that private IP address. Let's see if NSLOOKUP will actually even work for it. There we go. Okay. So what happens here is when you try to resolve it from this public location, it's actually resolving to this 40 dot address, although it does pick up the various aliases, right? We're gonna see in a second what's going on here. Is this done yet? Still going on. Okay. And then let's look at what else is there. So the other thing that's been set up besides this private link that provides this is this DNS zone. So what does this DNS zone do, right? So what this DNS zone is doing is that it is resolving these host names, right? And to understand what the full host name is, you take this and you attach it to that. But it's resolving these host names to these IP addresses. So these are the IP addresses that you just saw previously. And you can actually, you can resolve it to multiple IP addresses here. You can resolve these host names to multiple IP addresses. All it's going to do is it's going to map it so that those resolve, and then you should be all set. And then the final thing that's happening is that if you look over here to the Demo Labs VM, we have this thing called a network interface, and it's a NIC card for those from the good old days, right? And it's basically, the actual piece of hardware that identifies the device that you're using, right? Software or hardware. Now, in this case, for this VM, the NIC card is where we see this 10.0.0.4. And if you look over here, great, this is done. All right, I'm done with that. If you look over here, once again, just get rid of some of these. Close that. Okay. And I'll just switch this to Google. Pardon me, I'm a little bit of a stickler for a clean desktop. There we go. So that's what we're seeing here when we do this IP config, right? We're seeing this IP address setup. What you'll also notice is that there is this public IP address, right? And this public IP address that we have here, ultimately, that's what's showing up here, 23.96.95.37, right? So this machine can be accessed by the public address and by the private address. Now, that same capability is a big component of what the private links do. So you'll notice over here is the same icon, filter by type, right? And same type network interface. And in this case, this is the network interface for Demo Labs PE, right? So this is the network interface for that private endpoint that's associated with our website, right? So when we go in here, you'll notice that it essentially looks the same, right? What we're gonna do right now is we're gonna take, first of all, this URL right here, I'm gonna copy it, and we're gonna go into our VM, and we are going to paste it. And look at that, right? So why is this happening? So in our VM, the IP address works, right? As a static IP address, but over here, it does not work, right? So once you set up that private link, it blocks public access, right? So this is the fundamental setup. There's the fundamental component of this in terms of like giving you the ability to run your app services as private entity, as private services within your enterprise, basically as intranet sites, right? As you see here in our demo, in our scenario, the resources can be accessed internally, right? But they cannot be accessed externally, right? And we can do the same thing. We'll do an NS lookup, and we will put this guy in. Right? And as you can see, that NS lookup now resolves to 10.0.0.5, right? That's how you access it internally. So that's basically quickly going through this application and showing you how we can take that public-facing app service that we created in our previous videos and turn it into an intranet site that cannot be accessed from the external world. This is without us having to do any kind of IP filtering or anything like that. It's all essentially taken care of by these processes. Essentially, once you attach that private link to it, it automatically turns into an intranet site. And if you compare using this kind of capability to using an ACE, if that's all you're concerned with, I should say, because ACEs do offer a couple more things that this does not. The price points are different. This is about $150 a month to get to this level, whereas an ACE can be actually very expensive and cost prohibitive, and also requires you to do a little bit of capacity planning. And is also very, very slow compared to, in terms of like being able to quickly scale up, scale down. And as you can see here, once this is done, I can still treat this. This is still basically an app service. So I can still go in and scale out and basically, change my instance count as needed. Add some custom auto scaling as needed. Pretty much do what you're accustomed to doing with an app service. So this has been a quick look at at basically taking app services and bringing them into the enterprise for use in the enterprise. If you enjoy this video, then please like it. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe. I'm Edward Momeka, your host. Thank you for joining and have a blessed day.